Hello, LifeGroup leaders. My name is Gary Briggs. This week I get the privilege of sharing some thoughts and insights about our upcoming lesson. So it looks like we're going to be session 8, page 68. Still in Colossians chapter 1. Last week, Brother Tom kicked us off with our video and kind of set the backstory, the backdrop to Paul still being in prison, one of his prison letters here that he wrote to the church. One of the unique things we remember that Brother Tom said, and it's kind of, I think, the way his style is shown in this letter was the fact that he had never met these people. So I'm seeing, at least maybe it's just me, that some of the ways he's writing and approaching and kind of easing into some of the topics is largely influenced by that he hasn't met them face to face, even though he feels an obligation to help mature and grow these people. So again, my style, as you guys know me, is sometimes different than other people, and there's no one right or wrong way to approach a lesson like this. I thought about it and kind of struggled with it, to be frank with you, as to kind of what is it that we're supposed to get out of the lesson today. What are the key takeaways? What can we do, as we always say? What's the thing that we need to, the so what we need to apply to our life? So actually, as crazy as this sounds, we're in chapter 1, but I think the appropriate place to start is actually next Sunday's lesson and one verse out of there. So I'm going to flip forward to Colossians 2, verse 8. And next week, if I recall, Ken Gaines is going to be the one doing the video. So Ken, forgive me if I'm stealing some of the thunder here, but Paul is writing this verse: be careful that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deceit based on human traditions, based on the elements of the world rather than Christ. So if we start there and think, well, why is he writing this? Where's he going with this? What crescendo is he building to? It seemed to me, as I studied, that Paul's preparation of saying that in next week's lesson, he's building in chapter 1, last week's lesson, this week's lesson, and he needs to establish credibility with these people. Again, he'd never seen them. He had to remind them who he was, how he knew of them, his purpose. And so this week's lesson really is a prerequisite to that verse, that lesson coming up next week. We know from in any Bible, kind of the little preview talks about the false teachers. There were people coming into the church that had different ideas, who were trying to minimize the role of Jesus, that he was important, but not the only important philosophy or teaching. It seems like they were easily being kind of tossed back and forth with some other thoughts or ideas that were creeping into the church, and Paul's trying to nip that in the bud, but he's going to do it in a very loving and kind way. He's going to be loving but firm, as some people say. So in last week's lesson and today's lesson, last week he started out and reminded them that he's an apostle of Jesus. So you don't just kind of choose to be one of those. It's just kind of the hand-picked, so to speak, special messenger, special people, which is an apostle, to represent God and Jesus and carrying out the mission. Paul goes on to talk about, and he mentioned in chapter 1 again, kind of a review, the person they know, Epaphras, is a friend of Paul. Maybe, I don't know, I should know if Paul led him to Christ. I'm thinking he probably did. So he's kind of the mentor, spiritual father. He's I think he calls Epaphras a dear fellow servant. So that's establishing some credibility between Paul in prison and this church in Colossae. He also talks about, like we reviewed last week and again today, he's a prayer partner. He's praying for them. He thinks about them often and prays for them often and wants to lock arms in prayer and intercede with them and for them. And then he mentions in today's lesson, he uses a word that I think is very significant. He used the word commission. He's commissioned. I think of that's almost synonymous with ordination that we see of pastors and deacons. And I mean, God commissioned him to be the messenger to the Gentiles, and he mentions that in the verses today, and we're in chapter 1, verse 24 through 20. Well, actually down through chapter 2, verses 3 or 4, and he mentions that he has been commissioned by God for them, and not only for them being Gentile Christians, but also the church in Laodicea and others in that area, to continue the work that Jesus started when he, of course, his death, burial, and resurrection, and the establishment of the church. And Paul brings that out as part of the credibility statements that he's lovingly saying to them. There's a chance, I think, when people start to believe something, and whether it's right or wrong, but in this situation, whether it was maybe some false teachings, and start to be influenced by that. Obviously, Epaphras was seeing it and hearing it and was concerned and troubled or worried about it enough to discuss it with Paul, which prompted him then to write the letter. There's a chance that people could get defensive, and they hear you to tell me how. So I'm sure Paul is very lovingly, prayerfully considering. And obviously we know all Scripture is inspired by God, the Holy Spirit inspiring him to choose his words carefully, but yet in such a way to lovingly confront their beliefs and warn them. He even uses the word warn. I'd have to take a minute to find it, but it says his job is to warn and teach them. So in one, I think in NIV, the word warn is admonish, which is kind of the same thought, that it's to be bold and call out those things that aren't right and not be, someone said there's a fine line between persistence and pestilence, and don't cross the line. So he's being persistent, hopefully not pestilent there, but he was not afraid to call out to them, because he felt that was part of his commissioning, to not allow false teaching to creep in and get a foothold in the church. So I thought of that too, that he was probably aware that there was a chance that they may become defensive. So I see that throughout here, that Paul again was establishing himself as an apostle, a friend, mentor of Epaphras, a prayer partner with them, and commissioned by God for them and / the Gentiles in our verses today. And again, I'm not going to read through those. Hopefully you will. But these are some of the thoughts I had kind of looking back to last week and looking forward a little bit to next week. This whole serious issue about this deceptive philosophy, the false teachings. And I don't want to go too far into that. That's not really this lesson, but I think it would be good. I think we as LifeGroup leaders share a lot in common with Paul. He had his group that he's leading and addressing and praying for. Well, we have our group, our LifeGroup. So we're to be the same. We're to be a good role model, as Paul was to, whether it's Philippians or Colossians, Galatians, Ephesians. We too, we need to be in prayer frequently for our life group members. We need to be bold. We need to be loving but willing, not be passive, but be willing to really tell the truth and not some half-truth. And that kind of reminds me of the false teaching that was going on back then. Didn't stop in that century. We have it sadly in America today and in the world today. It's, a lot prompted by Satan and his ulterior motives, but the discernment that Paul wanted the Colossians to have, and all the Christians, with that they would grow in spiritual knowledge, it talks about that, and in wisdom, to the degree that their discernment would be heightened, sharpened. We used to laugh and call it our baloney detector, that the check engine light would come on when you would hear something that kind of sounded true but didn't quite sound. And that's one of the key, I think, characteristics of a false teacher. They take a little bit of truth, a little bit of the Bible, and a little bit of their false teaching and kind of twist it together. So one of the things I'm going to have my life group do this week in preparation for next is to do a little study on false teachers. What are some of the common characteristics? How do they create a narrative that people are willing to follow, and why are people so, I guess the word gullible, to follow the false teaching? And I think Paul's heart, and we get to see a peek and a glimpse into his heart in this whole letter, he felt his commission was to teach and train, encourage, and build up spiritual growth and maturity to the degree that they could easily discern what real truth is and what half-truth is, or basically false teaching. And I think that's our goal too with our life group members, that we're not easily swayed by some of the things that we all know or see on TV or hear about or whatever, because there indeed is false teaching. I'm personally aware of some acquaintances and how they present kind of a little bit of a twisted view or perspective. And fortunately, my baloney detector goes off, and I'm thinking that doesn't pass the smell test when I compare it against the Word and the truth. And I think that's what Paul is definitely trying to do, and we as life group leaders need to do. And we've heard it many times, but it's a great analogy of the cashier at the bank or the teller who they don't teach them how to spot counterfeit money. They teach them what a real dollar bill or $50 or $100 bill looks like, so that when a counterfeit comes through, they can spot it because it's different, even small nuances of difference, but enough that they will be able to see that. And that's what our goal is, to know the Word so much and so have it such ingrained in our heart, be active in prayer, have the Holy Spirit helping us detect those false teachers. And so I'm going to have my group kind of go on a little personal study in preparation, in addition to, of course, it's in next week's lesson, to do that so that we can come back and share with each other next week how to identify that. And again, that's next week's lesson, but I thought today's lesson in Paul establishing credibility and validity with these folks he'd never met is very, very important to lay that foundation, so that when he does start telling them about deceptive philosophies and false teachers, they're not challenging him, they're accepting what he's saying, because they trust and have faith in his apostleship, in his commissioned role that he's playing in the church for all the Christians, especially the Gentiles, that the commissioning is all about. So that's really kind of the thoughts I had. Again, there's 2 or 3 ways to approach this lesson, but that's how God kind of spoke to me and said he's building to this key statement about the false teachers. And before he can't just jump right in with that, he's got to lay the groundwork in chapter 1. The supremacy of Jesus we talked about last week. He is not one of many. He is the supreme. He is the creator of everything, and everything is kept in order by him. There's no one like him. And so, again, that false teaching, I don't even know the name of it, but that's there's several like that they kind of twist and turn, and he's nipping that in the bud. And each of these verses are bite-sized pieces of information that to help them learn and see that they have to be very, very careful, very discerning, very careful, not gullible. And again, to recap and kind of land the plane here, I was reminded how important it is for us to do the same thing, absolutely the same thing. Love, encourage, support our life group members, encourage spiritual growth, maturity, in a loving way. Call them up. This is important. It's easy to be deceived if we're not actively involved in spiritual maturity, in attending life group, church, Bible study, prayer, accountability with each other. So those are the things that we need to be a role model, encourage, create that environment. And as Paul was commissioned to do that to his followers, I think we should see ourselves as being commissioned to do the same to our life group members, and take it serious and prepare each Sunday. Again, Brother Tom encouraged us not to do it Saturday night before Sunday, but prepare in such a way that we really are encouraging spiritual growth and encouraging maturity and encouraging growing in wisdom and knowledge, like Paul said. Again, next week, Paul's asking them to be rooted and grounded. So we want our class and our members to be the same. So hopefully that's some ideas for you. And you can take some of that or leave it either way and weave some of that into your notes for preparation. So thanks again. I hope you have a good week. Thank you.